on the journey back to Silicon Valley. In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at the Fetch API in JavaScript in the context of React and Material UI. If you're not familiar with what Fetch is, it's a way to pull data from an external source or a local source. If you're building React applications, chances are you're pulling data from somewhere. Fetch is an amazing way to do that. We'll also be looking at the React hooks, particularly useState and useEffect. useState will enable us to store and manipulate the data that we fetch. And useEffect will enable us to make calls to the API either once or a few times. What we're going to be building in this tutorial is a application that pulls users' data from an external API and renders it on the screen. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Go ahead and pull up our terminal. And then in here, we're going to do npx create React app. And then we're going to be naming our application users data, because that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to pull users data from an external API and render it on the screen. So in here, we're going to do users underscore data, and we're going to hit enter. And this will go ahead and install everything that we need to start a React application. Now, this may take a little bit of time depending on the speed of your computer. If you were successful creating this React application, you should be seeing this here. The next thing we want to do, we want to cd into the directory we've just created. So we're going to do cd users underscore data, and we're going to hit enter. And in this directory, we're going to install Material UI. Let's go ahead into the docs, which is right back here. Copy this, and then go back to your terminal and drop it here. And hit enter. And this will go ahead and install the core of Material UI. This also may take a few minutes depending on the speed of your computer. What we need to take care of, let's go back here in the docs, is the Roboto font. So Material UI was designed with the Roboto font in mind. So we have to pick up this link here and put it in our index.html. Now, to do that, we need to go into our code, actually. Okay, so in here, we're going to do a shortcut for VS Code, code period. Click that, the code. So once it opens, we're going to take a look at it. And inside our index.html, we need to put this link right here so that we have access to the Roboto font, okay? All right, let's go back to the terminal here. Our code open. Let's go into the CRC folder, which is the source folder, and go, no, actually we need to go to the public folder. And we need to go inside our index.html. Let me just enlarge this a bit. And let's go back into the Material UI docs. Copy this link. And then we're going to put it just down here. All right, and that gives us access to the Roboto font. Oh, I think we've done something wrong here. The title is red. Enlarge this. Oh, we need to close it here. Okay, looks good. All right, and there's another link that we need to pick up. Let's go into the docs. Here, font icons. So we need to pick up this link so that we have access to Material UI icons. Okay, so let's pick this up. And we're going to drop it right under our Roboto font. And now we have access to the Roboto font and also the icons. And okay, so next, let's go back into the terminal. And then, let's just check out the docs real quick again. Okay, we're going to do npm install Material UI icons. And this will give us access to all Material UI icons that we'll be able to use them. So back in the terminal again, drop this in here and hit enter, and it will install everything we need related to the Material UI icons. This may also take a few minutes depending on the speed of your computer. I have one more thing to install from Material UI, but we're gonna do it a bit after this. Let's go ahead and actually start our application and see if it's actually working on the browser. So in here, you just wanna do npm start. Successful starting your application, you should be seeing this. It means that things are running great in the browser. It's running on port 3000. All right, the next thing we wanna do, let's pull up our code. And let's get rid of this header here. And we're just going to replace it with an H1. Building a user's data app. Let's go ahead and save. Okay, let's pull up our terminal. Okay, all right, it's working. Now the next thing we want to do, guys, we're going to install Data Grid, which is a Material UI component that will enable us to display the user's data to the screen in a table grid manner that looks really nice. Okay, so let's go back into our docs. And in here, let's go ahead and copy this link. Oh, this is weird. Just this here. Okay, so copy this link, go back to your terminal, and then drop it in here. You have another terminal open here in VS Code. So we're going to drop it here. And let me just put it here so you guys can see it. Okay, so hit enter. And this will go ahead and install the data grid component for us. After our data grid was installed successfully, next thing we're going to create a component called users data. Okay, it's going to be right here. Users data. And in this component, we're going to be making calls to the API, pulling it and doing all the logic within this component, okay? So it's going to be called users data. We're going to import it up here. And let's go ahead and actually create it. Let's go into the source folder and then create users data.js. And then in here, we're going to use a shortcut. I believe it's RAFCE. Here it is. And just to see something on the screen, we're going to put an H1 here. We're going to say, this is users data component. Let's go ahead and save and see if anything freaks out. Where's our app here? It's probably still compiling. Yes, it is. Okay, here, it's showing up. Okay, so things are going great. Our users data component is working properly. Okay, so let's go in here. The first thing we want to do, guys, we're going to import our React hooks, useState and useEffect. Okay? Let's add a little I here. No. Oh, no, it's not that. Okay, I've copied the wrong thing. Hold on. Okay, here it is. So we've imported useState and useEffect, and these are the two React hooks that we're going to be using in our component. Okay? The next thing we want to do, we're going to import the data grid that we've just installed from Material UI. And here it is. All right. And now in here, we're gonna define our hooks. First, we're gonna be using the useState. So here we've created a variable called users and set users, and we set it to useState, and the initial state is gonna be an array, okay? So users will contain users, and then set users sets our state, it updates it, okay? So this is how you use React hooks, okay? All right, next we're gonna do a useEffect call to an API, to an external API. All right, the API we're gonna be using here, guys, just to show it to you on the screen, is gonna be, here, I'm just gonna pull it from here. Here it is. Okay, so we're making a call to this particular API here. This is just a external API on the internet. It's free, and this is the URL. And what we're gonna be pulling is these users here. It's gonna be 10 of them, okay? So we're gonna make a call to this API, pull this user's data into our React application. And the way we're gonna make this call to the API, we're gonna use the useEffect hook. Okay, so I'm gonna grab a snippet of code here and then explain it. All right, here it is. So we do useEffect. useEffect takes a callback function in there, and then we're gonna do fetch. And this is the fetch method that we've talked about in the beginning of the tutorial. So this is how you use it. You do fetch, and then in here, we're gonna put the URL of the particular API that we are calling, which is this one in our case, the one that I've just showed you earlier here. So when we make the call to the API, then we do a then we will access a response. The response is whatever is coming back from the API. Once we access the response, we will turn it into JSON. Because every response has to be turned into JSON in order for you to be able to consume that data. So we're gonna turn it into JSON here, and then we're gonna access users. Okay, this will allow us to access the users inside that array. And then once we do that, we're gonna set our users up here to set users, okay? So we're gonna take those users and set them up as our state. And once we do that, we will have whatever came back from the API is gonna be stored in this variable here, users, okay? Now, okay, next, we're gonna be creating a column. So we're gonna have columns and rows because we're gonna be displaying a data grid or a table if you're familiar with HTML. So we need columns and also rows, okay? So we're gonna define our columns and rows, and then we're gonna map over the data that we get back and then render it to the screen, okay? All right, so next. Go ahead and define our columns. Let me just use this, okay. All right. It's an array that's gonna contain an ID, a header name, and a width, okay? And basically we're gonna have name, username, and then email. Those are the three things we're gonna get from the data. There's much more, but we're just gonna get these three. So this will define our columns, and then we're gonna define our rows. Our rows are gonna be empty initially, since we're gonna map over the users that we fetch from the data, extract name, username, and then email, and then put them in the row, okay? So we're just gonna use let because rows is gonna change, we can't use const. And then we're going to initialize it as an empty array, and then we're going to map over our users. Let me grab the snippet here. Okay, so we're going to map over users, and users coming to us from the state. Remember, we defined it up here. Once we made that call to the API, users was set by set users, so we have all that data available inside users. And then we're going to use a .for each. That will give us access to the user. And then we're going to push the ID, name, username, and email into rows. Okay? So we go into users, we use the for each, we access each user, and then we push the ID, name, username, and email into rows. Okay? And then in here, instead of saying this is user's component, this is user's data component, we're gonna do a few things here. Okay, let me grab it. All right, let me just grab the snippet of code. Okay, so we have a div, just like usual, inside a return function. We have some CSS here. The height is 800px, and then the width is 100%. And this is the width and height of our table or our data grid. We're going to have an H3. It's a title that says users data. And then this is the data grid component that we've gotten from Material UI. In this data grid, it takes a few properties. The first one is ID. Now, ID has to be a unique number each time. Now, some people do this differently. I just use a mat.random in here. And then each time it will just give a randomized number to the ID, creating a unique one. And then rows, we're going to give it the rows here that we defined. And here columns, we will give it the columns that we defined up here. And then you have page, how many users will be displayed on the screen, that is 10. And then we have a boxes on the left side of our data. And then we have an on row selected, which is just says console.log row selected. If you select a row, it's just gonna do a console.log, okay? And okay, yeah, so I think that is pretty much it. Let's go ahead and let's go ahead into our app.js and just take out this H1 here. We don't need it anymore. Just go ahead like that. Save. Let's go ahead and pull up our app. And here it is, guys. So it has pulled all the users from the external API and has rendered them in the screen. And as you can see, it's a nice table grid that's provided by the data grid component in Material UI. So that is how you use fetch, guys. So we've called an external API, pulled the data, rendered it on the screen. That's pretty much what you do in React applications. You pull data from somewhere, render it on the screen, or run logic on it before you do that. So let's just do a quick recap. Let's go back into our users data component. So what we're doing here, we're just importing React as usual. And then we're importing two hooks, useState and useEffect. The useState enables us to store and manipulate the data. And then the useEffect is used to do an external call to the API. It's the equivalent of component did mount in class-based components. And then we've defined a columns, which is an array that will have a ID, name, username, and email. And then we've defined rows, which is an empty array. And then we've mapped over the users, which is the data that's coming back from the API. And then we've extracted ID, name, username, and email, and then put it into rows. And then here we've displayed the data grid component along with the rows and columns that we've defined previously. So that is it for the Fetch API. That is how you use it. with React and Material UI. I really hope that you've liked the tutorial. If you did, hit the thumbs up on the video, subscribe to the channel for more, and please consider supporting the journey with a cup of coffee. There's a link on how to do that at the end of the video. And that would be it for today. Until next time, this is MJ on the journey back to Silicon Valley.